It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back to the show, everyone. Another great episode, Season 2, Beneath the Helmet. I'm your host, Arjuna George, and we're in for another treat of a conversation tonight. Today, I got CEO of Ithinka, Jess Ward, on the air. So welcome to the show, Jess.
Thank you so much for having me, Chief George. I am excited for our chat. We get a lot in common.
Likewise. So tell our audience today a little bit of who Jess is and your background and what brought you to where you are today, essentially.
Sure. So I am the CEO and founder of Ithinka. Our company aims to teach mental fitness to the fire service so we can dramatically modernize firefighter wellness, lower the suicide statistics. I'm so passionate about this because I was a firefighter and EMT for 8 years. I was both paid and volunteer positions, got to deploy down to Antarctica, which was really fun. And I am now a master NLP practitioner, which is just a mouthful name for someone who is kind of like a personal trainer for the mind. So I really geek out on anything to do with our minds. I really think it's kind of the last unexplored space for humanity to really dive into, like, what are we really capable of with our minds? So that's me.
Cool. And probably so much more than we know right now, right? By our
Yes.
minds. Yeah, my mind blows me away every day, but just minds, brains, the nervous system, all that combined is like, it just boggles my mind every day how amazing it is. So
yes, and how it's constantly changing, neuroplasticity, how we're just constantly changing, and we can pick up habits, we can drop habits. Like, it's really fascinating when you have that awareness to step back and look at yourself as a holistic creature and what role your mind has in all of this.
Totally. So I gotta dive into this. Antarctica. How do you get deployed down there? And what was this all about?
Boy. I didn't have a dream to go down there like most people. Most people apply several times. The contractor at the time was Raytheon Polar Services. And so I happened to be working on the bus one day, and my partner and I stopped at a gas station to fuel up. And I just had this sense I needed to go into the gas station. I was like, I don't really need anything. It was a gut hunch. I walk in, I'm kind of like milling around. I'm thinking, what am I doing here? And I grab a pack of gum and I'm standing in line. And this guy taps me on the shoulder because I was in uniform, and he's like, oh my God, my friend just went there. He kind of had this hippie vibe. He had long hair, and he's like, and he made like $250,000 as a whatever. I don't even know if he told me what his friend did down there, but it's like I went into a trance. I put the gum down. I walked out to the bus and I looked at my buddy and I was like, I'm going to go to Antarctica. And like 2 weeks later, I was deploying. Like, I got hired. I put my application in. They literally hired me at the interview because Raytheon was based in Denver, where I am based. And I was off. Like, it just happened so fast. So, and
what was
that
your
was
job
all.
down there?
Yeah, I was a firefighter.
Down
My
there.
first season,
Wow.
I was a
That's
firefighter.
amazing. Wow.
I actually learned to drive engines on ice. I became a driver operator. We had like 6 weeks to learn how to drive engines. And so that was our window. And then, my second season, I returned. I had way too much fun first season. I came back as a dispatcher. So I got to see at the firehouse, of course. I wouldn't do anything else down there. So, yeah, it was 13 months total. I was deployed.
And you're in a fire service, like a municipal structural fire service prior to that or after that, or how did that work?
So I started 16 firefighting.
16. Wow.
As a volunteer. I our family had been in the fire service locally in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. That's where I grew up. And I was a chubby little girl. And my parents every Friday, because our family was in the fire department, they'd be like, let's go to the fish fry. That was one of the fundraising things, the good old fish fries put on at the social hall. So we would go. And when I was 12, my parents were like, I think it'd be a good idea for you to volunteer here. So I started running plates of fish and fries out. I was like a little runner and started hanging out with the guys. Everyone in the kitchen was a firefighter, a volunteer firefighter. And so when I was 16, the chief jokingly was like, "Hey, you want to join?" And my eyes lit up. I'm like, "Yeah." I don't think he thought I was going to say yes. And so my journey into firefighting has been very happenstance. Life has kind of guided me into it, and I am so glad it did. I think it's one of the best things that happened to me ever. So much fun. I just have good memories. So
What was it like joining at 16? Was it a shock to you, or were you kind of ready for the next step of joining the department?
I feel like I tasted my own immortality the first time I rode backwards on a speeding fire truck. Like, I was a very good little girl. I was, the straight A student. I did what I was told. And firefighting, especially volunteer firefighting in Western PA at the time, was very much like a rogue thing. It was rogue for a girl to be doing it. It was rogue for, even though, we had a cousin, it was like, why would you, my identity up until that point was not as a rebel at all. I was following the rules. So that opened a door for me that never closed. And, it was just such a thrilling experience. And I think in retrospect now, like, I don't think I would be the same person if I hadn't joined, because it really, having that edginess now to who I am, my identity, not being afraid to do something so outside of my comfort zone, it really changed who I was completely. I mean, totally different life trajectory, from what I probably would have been like a scientist, like holed up somewhere in a lab, not talking to people. So yeah, I wasn't ready for it, but when it hit me, man, I submitted to it, and it was amazing. It was amazing. I
You
don't
got
know
the
that my
firebug.
family thought it was. My family scared the crap out of them that I
Yeah,
was doing this and the things I was doing, but no.
beautiful. Love it. So, what changed in your life to leave the fire service and to explore other things in life? What happened there?
Yeah, so continuing that story of like, my family is like, this is just a phase, right? You're gonna go become a, genetic engineer, right? You're gonna go like pursue your science dreams. That was very important for them, for me. Um, and so kind of when college, I did 5 years, between 16 and 21, and kind of college started to tear me away of like, time to get serious about, what you're gonna do. And so I said goodbye for a little while and tried to focus on other things. And it was a siren's call. Like, it wasn't, but maybe less than 5 years later, I had gone through a few jobs. I just didn't feel fulfilled. And I was like, man, I miss firefighting a lot. Like, I just miss the culture, like civilians, civilian jobs, you wouldn't die for your coworkers necessarily. And so I just missed it. I missed that heroic archetype of like, I'm working in a bookstore. Like, what am I doing? Like, what meaning does this have? And so, yeah, I gravitated back. I went to academy. I put myself through academy and got my EMT cert and started running ambulance in Denver here when I got deployed to McMurdo. And then, yeah, it all kind of ended prematurely. When I got back, I was looking for a more stable long-term position, and that was when it was really popular. Everybody was applying, and went into a really bad interview. And the guys like got up in my face and were like, "You can't do this," and kind of were that hazing behavior that we saw sometimes, and it just, I just walked out of that and it got in my head. And that seed too, that of having to leave something I love so much because I didn't think as a woman I'd be able to break through the good old boys club. That's what it felt like. Like I would never be respected. Even since I was top of my academy, I was like, I'm never going to be respected in the same way a dude would be. And that was so soul crushing. So I walked away, and then here I am 15 years later. I can't stay away. It's in my blood. It really is in my blood now. I will always, in my identity, part of my identity will be a firefighter forever. So
I can resonate with that 100%. I could have easily left the fire service and had nothing to do with it and gone to a bookstore and worked there, but I was drawn back to working somehow in the fire service, not operationally, of course, but doing everything else I'm doing. So beautiful. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem.
So we're going to dive into the focus of this podcast is about NLP, our brains, and how we can, that mental fitness capacity.
Yeah.
So let's start off with what is mental fitness to start with? What does that mean to somebody who's never heard of that term before?
I've started to call it mental mapping. So if we back up a little bit, I am a master NLP practitioner. That's what I'm trained in, and the approach that I take to all of this. And that modality, not a lot of people have heard about it. Not a lot of people know what it is. And it's hard to tell what it is from the language alone, right? It's kind of a mouthful. And it doesn't have a good context. Like when you kind of tell someone about it, the closest it would be is to be like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But I don't like that because I'm not a clinician. To me, mental fitness is about just like physical fitness. It's about the things you're doing preventatively. Like, let's start with the analogy of physical fitness. Are you going to the gym? Are you eating well? Are you getting enough rest? That stuff is really what coasts you into resilience when you have an injury or, anything physically assaults you. You can bounce back easier. Mental fitness is the same thing. And what are the things that you're doing cognitively to stay flexible? So, how flexible are you mentally? That means how can you look at something that maybe you once perceived as bad and kind of extract the golden nuggets of it? Like, what did you learn? How did you grow from that situation? It's also about your attention and your focus. That's another skill. Like, how able are you to focus on the things that matter to you versus the noise of media, the noise of what other people's opinions are, the noise of your family's opinions. And then the last thing is just good cognitive habits to me. Things like not dwelling so much on things. When you start to spiral, having a tool that you can kind of back up and realize like, okay, I'm not my thoughts right now. I'm just experiencing my thoughts. Instead of going fully into an emotion, losing yourself, and then doing behaviors that you kind of regret later or that more subtly influence the course of your life, right? Because when we act from high emotions, we're actually changing our trajectory in life, right? Our decisions and behaviors change, and then we're actually moving off course. And so those are the kind of the three main areas, but you can kind of think of it like a map. I've started really thinking about mental fitness more like a map. But we can get into that a little bit. So I don't want to make the answer too complicated right now.
So going back to NLP, how did you get introduced to NLP, and what changed in your life once you started doing that for your own practice, your own mental fitness, your own mental mapping?
Sure. So once I left the fire service, I really struggled with my identity of who am I outside of being a firefighter. I did not have an alter ego. I had literally left, that girl at the door, the very intelligent, analytical, woman who was probably going to go into a science career. I had kind of abandoned her. And so I was trying to figure out who I was. And I spent pretty much all of my 30s, a good decade, just in searching mode. And so, and having a lot of highs and lows of depression. I mean, I moved into a van. I decided to do a social experiment and go live in a van, do #van life for 2 years, which is great if you're in a good mental space. If you're not in a good mental space, that really messes with you, like, because you're breaking a lot of the social norms. Like, you live in your car at the end of the day. And so that started to really mess with my mind. And so that whole period, I would try things and then quit. I struggled to find a stable place of where I felt like I wanted to be. And so NLP kind of came on my radar because I was preparing to unalive myself. Like, I had kind of started to develop periods of ideations where when things got really bad, I would really consider, like, maybe this isn't all worth it. And I made a list. I recognized at my lowest point, I was living back at home. I'd moved back in with my parents, and I was just really struggling. And I made a list, and it was like my death list of, like, this is what I'm willing to try before I Google how to make a noose. And NLP happened to be on that list. And I started just working my way through. It was EMDR, red light therapy. There's a bunch of different things that I was hoping would rescue me. And man, when NLP, when I started learning that, and it was just on an online course, just a small step in the door, my mind blew open. It just, like, exploded. And so, yeah, it started off very innocently. I didn't know where it was. I was just using it to save myself. I'd never intended it to turn into a practitioner and be helping other people with it. My only goal was to stay alive. And so, yeah, that was one of the only things that I found that was industrial strength enough to get me out of the mental spaces that I had wandered into that last decade.
Wonder you're so passionate about it. Saved your life.
It did.
Yeah.
And it's just so fascinating. Like I said, as a cognitive nerd, it really, I think, teaches you skills that we all should have learned growing up, in school or from our families, but unfortunately we didn't. Self-awareness, self-regulation, what to do when you get stressed out. Like, we get a lot of generic advice of, well, get enough rest, spend time with your friends. And if you can't do those things, it's like you don't have anything. And I feel like NLP really gives you, like, concrete tools of, like, this is what you do. This is what's causing your mental state. And to me, that practical element. I mean, I love woo-woo stuff. I spent, much of the time in the van was spent, with my crystals and my incense, but NLP was, like, practical. The side of me, the firefighter side of me, that was like, I got to get this job done. Like, NLP satisfied that, and it still does. And I think that's why it's so good for the fire service. Like, it's super cut and dry, like, yeah.
Who would be your perfect client to work with?
I really believe that everyone would benefit from this. Everyone, like I said, everyone struggles with mental health. It's such a dirty word these days. It's just a lot of, like, bad advice and not a lot of, like I said, practical steps. But I would say probably progressive fire departments, would be a great person to work with. I've kind of pivoted more towards working with individual firefighters because part of the whole break the stigma messaging, I believe the stigma doesn't come from fear of asking for help. It's actually fear of getting the scarlet letter from your department when you do activate your EAP. And so I really love working with firefighters who recognize that they need a new set of tools. They need something that is going to work no matter what, that are willing to put the work in, and that really are dedicated to their personal growth. Like, that's definitely my ideal client.
I've had a few guests come on and say the exact same thing. The biggest fear that firefighters have is losing their job because they've shared that they have an injury to their mind or something, or maybe a physical injury. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's coming up over and over again. It's not actually reaching out for help. It's actually the cause of the backlash of reaching out for help. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's kind of, I feel like Break the Stigma now is more for HR professionals at the fire departments. They need to remember that when a firefighter has a mental health crisis, that they can still rehab as if they had had a physical injury. Like rehab is not only possible, but when you give them, someone the grace and the opportunity to fully heal from that, to fully form new habits, and you kind of rally around them, they're going to have more success. So, yeah, exactly that. I'm glad I'm not the only one. I love hearing that there's a consensus on that. So,
I wouldn't say a consensus, but I definitely have had numerous guests kind of repeat the exact same thing and a lot of them, it was unfortunately personal stories that they experienced themselves, right? So
yeah, yeah.
so NLP, what's it stand for, and kind of what's a real simple way for our listener today to understand how it could support them?
NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. So when you break that down, neuro, mind or brain, linguistic, words, programming, habits or conditioning. So it's a triangle. And as soon as I saw, it's shown on the screen of those three things, your language, your attention, and your habits, it immediately reminded me of the fire triangle. Like that was the first thing I thought of. And I am not a fire tetrahedron girl. I learned the fire triangle. I will die by that, that framework. The chemical reaction is assumed. So, but I immediately was like, this is it. It was literally my eureka moment. And so if you think about the fire triangle, you've got these three elements coming together to cause a fire. And so in order to mitigate the fire, you need to learn to move the triangle, right? Reduce, take care of one of the sides. Same thing with these three elements. So, what is your story or your narrative that you're telling about the situation? The other, that's kind of like the oxygen. The heat source is kind of like your attention. Wherever your attention is going, right? That's where all of your senses are going to be directed. That's essentially your body. Your body will literally orient to whatever you're paying attention to. Everything else just becomes noise. You get filtered out. And on the bottom, kind of the fuel are your habits, your conditioning. And that's what's really getting triggered. When you're going into a reaction, you've learned anger, you've learned sadness, you've learned stress. Like we actually learned this stuff from watching people, from our parents, from our families. How does your culture handle anger? Like what's your gender have to do with it? All these things fuel the fire, so to speak. And so it's the same concept of just learn how to mitigate one of the sides. Get a tool where you're either putting water on the fire, you're smothering the fire. NLP is the same thing, but for your mind, for your reactions, so that you can essentially be a firefighter of your own emotions and feel more in control, feel more inner authority, feel like you're not just haphazardly, going through life and getting affected by things and having to control your situation in order to feel good. You can actually feel better from the inside out, and then your behaviors follow suit, right? You are more in control of your outcomes, your actions and all that good stuff, and be more of a master of your destiny. Just like with fire, the better you are at firefighting, the more structures you can save, the more people you can save, and you're more of a master of others' destiny in that way too. So it's really cool analogy, both triangles.
As soon as you said that, that's the first thing that popped in my mind as well, was the triangle.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're walking somebody through this, a firefighter through an NLP session,
Mm-hmm.
is it like a coaching session where you're asking questions, or is it more like a hypnosis, or how does that work where you're dealing with it? Like maybe just walk through how that looks when you're dealing with a client.
Yeah. So generally what we do, it's a 9-week program. And so far I've been doing one-on-one, but I really would like to kind of transition to more group work, so that they have kind of some camaraderie, while they're learning this. But it's like peeling an onion. We start with kind of this concept, just what I told you. That's basically what we learn class 1 hour at a time, once a week. And then they've got homework of like, here's your tool based on this framework. Go use it for a week, come back and report what your experience was. So we have live, like, it's very experiential. It's like, I want you to learn the knowledge, and then I want you to go apply it on your own for a week. And so it's all about, having that homework of practicing your self-rescue, and then the fine-tuning of being able to come back then week 2 and say, this is what I found, how can I tweak? And then we continue that for 9 weeks. And then beyond that, really adding a community of support, like having other people who have also gone through this training to kind of perpetuate it, because it's only good if you're using it, right? The minute it's like a chainsaw. A chainsaw isn't going to help you unless it's turned on and you're wielding it. And just like with this information, unless it's turned on and you're wielding it, it's not going to do anything for you. And so recognizing that it's a lifestyle, and then we help kind of create that vessel and the community to continue, the dedication to it and keep doing it. And if this wasn't the tool for you, like, no harm, no foul, like, we tried. And so, yeah, that's kind of the structure that we've developed to try and make it not only efficient and effective, but also having the longevity of actually being able to maintain the habits.
So the linguistic part, is that like self-talk? Is that where that would come into play? Is like how to talk to yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a whole week on taming the voice in your head. Like, it's like breaking a horse. Like, for that week, you don't let yourself talk bad to yourself. Like, it is, and these are all steps when I was learning that I went through. So I understand, I did the exact same thing. I took like multiple weeks taming the voice in my head and being like, no, you don't get to talk to me like that. So yes, it includes that. It also includes how you're describing things. Word choice is huge. Compare describing something as a problem, like, I got a really big problem, versus using words like challenge or adventure. Those are the other two I like to use. Like, this is an adventure. Like, whoa, you can feel that instantly of like, okay, it's a little softer. It's a little less like alarm bells are going off. It's a little more an invitation to actually like rise to the occasion when you call something, oh, this is a big adventure. And so even things like that, but that's a little bit more of an advanced skill. But yes, the starting point is self-talk, because that is huge, how we talk to ourselves in our own head.
First thing that pops in my mind is I'm nervous, or you say I'm excited, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the other classic that I've heard before, right? And you're about to go on stage, you're like, oh, I'm really nervous. No, I'm excited to go on stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Exactly.
just those word change. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Awesome. So mind mapping, how does that play into all this? What is mind mapping? I can kind of have a visual of it, but maybe give us a little understanding of what that means.
Yeah. So as I went down the NLP rabbit hole, there were things and thoughts beyond even NLP connections I started to make beyond that. So mental mapping is actually a term from geography. In the 60s, a guy named Kevin Lynch, he was an urban theorist. He actually wrote a book called The Image of the City. And I have not read the book. Literally, this is a new idea that's forming for me. And he essentially figured out, how do people conceptualize their environment? Like, where do they put landmarks? Where do they put edges and boundaries? And he found that most people's conceptions of even their physical environment is very partial, fragmented, and mixed with other concerns, right? If you ask them to draw a picture, it's not going to be like a map. Like it's very, it looks very childlike, like honestly, to be honest. And so, but the difference between, right, when you think about mapping, that's an idea. You know, you have ideas in your head of where things are spatially, but all ideas are ideas. That sounds very, I mean, it sounds really obvious, but when you think about all ideas are ideas, so it would make sense that then emotions, states of being also have a spatial quality to them. Like if you're someone who doesn't feel shame a lot, like that feels very distant for you, like in your own mind. And you have certain pathways, right, to Depressionville, to Angry Land. You know, like to me, they are actual like physical places in your cognition that you have created. Some of them you visit very frequently, some of them you don't. And it's the navigation part. If you don't learn to navigate out of them, you may find yourself suddenly in places you don't want to be. And that's when we take kind of extreme measures to get out of those spaces. And I just found that spatial relationships were the best way to describe emotions, like, and feeling states. And the more and more I build on this idea, I'm like, that makes sense, because otherwise, if you think of them as linear, you know, the other framework we could use as, you know, linear, like things happen in a straight line. But that's not often the experience. Like the experience for me is like suddenly I'll be like I often just find myself dropped into places. So in my mind. And so really it's the navigating out of them, and it is navigation, because if otherwise, if you know, if you do think of them as linear and not spatial, like not that they more as potentials, you know, it's spatial in a sense of they have potential that you could arrive there suddenly, but you could also go somewhere else. And those potentials always exist, very much like geography. Philadelphia will always be there. You know, Miami is always going to be there. But because otherwise it's very easier with that linear framework. If you feel like your mental constructions and the representations you have in your head, which is really all we're interacting with, we're always interacting with our own representations. We think we're interacting with reality, but really that's what we're interacting with. That can lead to kind of these dead ends. They feel like a dead end, kind of like I was when I was really like, okay, I'm trying a bunch of stuff and then I'm done. I can't get out of here. This is the only way out. So yeah, I'm really interested in integrating this idea of geography with states of mind. I think it's really helpful.
Very cool. So how did you, like for myself, when I talk to firefighters, emotions are definitely a challenging conversation.
Mm-hmm.
How did you break the barrier to talk about emotions with firefighters, first responders in a way that connects with them?
I don't. I don't use that word.
There you go.
I have struggled, you know, my first brand was called Emotional Fire Academy. And that went over like a lead balloon.
Yes, I can
So
see
I
that.
learned that, you know, we have jargon in the fire service. We have jargon that we use. And what words can we use that the fire service really connect better with? So I don't ever say emotional anymore. That is not, to me, an appropriate sphere for this profession. I think to really get into it, you know, I started to call it mental performance training. That was a little bit more approachable, Because it's something like you can really get off on getting mentally fit, just like you do at the gym. You can go get all glistening and muscly and feel really good about yourself. And that has more of the vibe of like personal growth, kind of Tony Robbins personal development, which is also a really safe approach. But to me, this mental mapping, I have never heard anyone do this analogy. And when you think about how important navigation is to the fire service, it's hugely important. I mean, think about a May Day. That's when you can't find your way out of a building, or you're down, or you're in a, you fell through the floor into a basement. Getting to a call. I remember running calls pre-GPS. I'm aging myself here a little bit, but map reading, critical skill. We showed up late to a call, we got our asses chewed. So, and then, even where we stage equipment on the fire ground, we have complex jargon for location, not only structural, but, even with ARF and hazmat, different zones. And like, we're constantly referring to navigation in the fire service. We don't use that word navigation, but it zippers in really nicely to what we're already doing.
What word do you use?
Mental mapping. That's the new one.
That's the one. Okay, cool. Awesome.
That's the money shot, baby.
I love it. Love it. Awesome. Very cool. So what other things do you do in your own self-care tool on top of NLP for your own wellness? What else do you do?
Oh gosh. I use my own tools. Like, I really believe in drinking your own Kool-Aid. I just think that keeps you relevant and pertinent. And I think people can feel that when you're working with them, of like, I'm just not blowing hot air. Like, this is my Halligan. This is my emotional Halligan, and I'm showing it to you, and it works for me. I actually had to use, it had been a while. I had to use it just a couple days ago, where I had to go back to basics. I am not afraid, and I don't beat myself up when I have to go right back to square one. Because like I said, I will sometimes, and I don't know why. I can theorize all I want about, maybe it's my hormones, maybe it just a thought came up, but suddenly I will find myself aflame in emotion, and I have to use my own tools. And it reminds me to do that, to actually, that they are useful and they're still working. But the other thing is really food. I've really experimented a lot with food. In the last 3 months, I cut sugar out completely. So I'm keto now. I've gone totally keto. And that as well has been a really interesting journey. Because, we all have these hidden vices in our life, and sugar and overeating is definitely, like I said, as a little fat child, like that consuming, it was just an easy way for me to kind of escape. And going keto makes that it really puts it on display of like, whoa, I recognize that I was doing stuff like that. So eating is a big part of my self-care, and learning. That's a big one. When I conceptualize these things, because I always want to stay relevant, fresh, interesting. I love kind of mashing these different ideas together. I went down a rabbit hole with I was like, oh my gosh, like there's all these, interesting new vocabulary, pragmatism and behavioral geography. And I was all this stuff. I'm like, ooh, I get to like investigate all of this, because there's so much crossover. I think part of the problems that we are seeing right now in the fire service are because we haven't had a lot of industrial crossover. And I am excited, as the minds and the generational turnover are happening, that there's going to be this infusion of like kind of some fresh ideas coming in and borrowing from other industries who've had success, and also kind of being an example. So yeah, that also, those three things or what I like to do for self-care.
I agree with all those, and I'm on keto as well. And it's also one of those things that I find I'm the clearest mind when I'm on keto.
Mhm.
Zero brain fog, lots of energy. I can focus. My brain is like working top notch when I'm on keto, which is pretty interesting to experiment with. This is the second time I've gone onto it, so
Oh, nice.
definitely,
How
yeah.
how long did you last before your first stint?
3 months, and so
Okay.
we just started October 1st. So
Oh,
yeah,
nice.
yeah.
Congratulations.
Yes, it's fun. I love it. I honestly, I could easily see myself just doing that as a lifestyle. I know it's not something you probably do for long periods of time. It's probably good to go in and out, in and out.
Hmm.
But I feel the best when I'm on keto for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it forces me to be really more present with my food.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was eating a lot of just like wraps and convenience
Mm-hmm.
meals. And now because it's just protein and veggie, I have to cook. And so I'm really like more mindfulness of like, what do I want to eat? And then being very particular about like, oh, I'm tired of salad. How can I really bring pleasure to this meal? And being more creative with like, I'm just gonna make some keto bagels are my thing right now. Like I wasn't baking a lot. That was something I used to do as a kid. I loved baking, and I've returned to that because now I love testing like, man, you can make a bagel that you wouldn't know it was like mozzarella and almond flour. I don't understand the food chemistry of that, but it's shocking.
And cottage cheese. That's like the superfood in keto world.
You can
Yeah.
turn cottage cheese into like Doritos,
Oh yeah. This is
muffin. Like I've
yeah.
seen cottage cheese become every food group,
Yeah.
which is really exciting. That in itself is like magic.
Yeah. It's pretty funny.
So,
So is there any question that is kind of stewing in the back of your mind that you're like, I wish Arjuna asked me this question? Anything that you want to share with the world?
um, I'd love to share a book with people and kind of return to the mental mapping for a second. I don't think I mentioned that, um, you know, when I said that we only interact with our own representations, that's not just hot air. It's actually my favorite book, How Emotions Are Made by Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. She mentions that we're actually wired that way. So 90% of all the connections coming into our primary visual cortex are coming from other parts of our brain, and only a small percentage of those inputs are actually from the outside world, from our eyeballs, our vision to our primary visual cortex. So 90% of what we are experiencing visually is a prediction. That's essentially what a huge part of the book is about. That's massive. And so when I say like a mental map, you have a mental map of your entire world. That's 90% of your predictions, your fears, your worries, your stories you're telling in your head, your assumptions about how things are, about how reality is, about how everything is weaves together into this representation that you have constructed entirely. And we're really good at this, right? We're really good at doing this. And it's only when we get the opportunity of experiencing prediction error, that's when we get to learn of like, oh, the map in my head didn't get me to where I need to go. Maybe I need to adjust it a little bit. And so I just wanted to bring that up because I think there hasn't been a lot of talk in the media about this. Before I read this book, which totally changed my life, changed how I saw the world. I thought emotions were hardwired into our brain. They're not. This book tells you exactly why they're not. So I really recommend you read it, or check it out in the least, because I think it's important to kind of dispel some of the myths of how we think about ourselves. Because that is affecting our behaviors, and our behaviors and actions then dictate our outcomes, what we're choosing, and then how our life ends up, whether we're getting to the places we want to go or not. And that's where the mental map comes in, and being better at navigating. So this stuff may sound very philosophical, but it's very, very practical. And I wouldn't have still been with it 5 years after I learned it if it weren't. So, because I tried a lot of things. So, yeah, I just wanted to put that plug out there. And I really think, this is the way that we're hopefully going to move with the fire service, is integrating more of this cognitive technology, because our suicide rates are pointing to a lack of us being able to navigate successfully. I mean, that is, like I said, it's such an important part of our job as firefighters. And when you don't know how to get out of a bad mental space, that's when you consider unaliving. So, but navigation is there for you. Learning how to navigate. There's an alternative to really, really genuinely break out of those bad places and not go back. Or when you do get dropped into it, you figure your way out pretty fast. So yeah, I just want to give people hope who are maybe listening and who've maybe gone through a lot of different stuff, tried therapy, tried EMDR, tried everything under the sun, and they just feel like they're just tired. It's exhausting. I totally get it. And you don't have to leave the fire service. Like, there are things like this, like NLP. Check out this book, that you can try. And yes, it's out there. Just don't stop. Don't stop looking.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that's my whole mission. Is I don't want people to leave the fire service. I want people to live and thrive through the fire service and have an amazing career.
yeah.
We're not all guaranteed to get PTSD from this job. We're all going to see trauma, but we all also have a lot of tools and resources and support to have a healthy career, right? So
yeah. And thank you for what you do,
oh,
Arjuna. It's wonderful. It's wonderful
you.
to come nerd out on this stuff with someone else
I
who
love it.
feels
Love it.
similarly. So,
Can somebody do NLP by themselves, or is this something that they need some guidance with?
so in the beginning, I think it's good to have a guide. Although, I learned entirely online. Like, I learned through the interface of a computer through just an online class. I think it's definitely good at some point to get feedback, whether you're learning for yourself or even it's just fun to practice with a friend, try it on a friend. Because there's benefit to getting really good on your own. And there's also benefit to doing it with someone else and having their perspective added in, both add value. So yes, I think as with anything in the beginning, it's good to have, someone kind of showing you the ropes to get there a little quicker, but then really it is you're then cast back out into the world with your own mental map, and that's part of the personal growth that comes with learning it. So
it is a self-care tool that we can use for the rest of our lives ourselves, as well as being guided. Yeah, cool.
Oh yeah, it's very much an autonomous strategy. Once you learn how to self-rescue using NLP, especially what I do, I have a primary tool that I teach people based off that triangle. And that's the only tool, like, that's it. That's the tool you use. You keep going back to that and you get really proficient on it, just like a chainsaw, and so, yes, it is definitely about self-rescuing, but it helps with peer support. It helps you understand what other people are going through too. So it very much has social application to it. Because you can see in that triangle when someone else is struggling where they're, it's easy for us to look at someone else and be like, oh, you better change your story on that, or you're paying too much attention to this, or you got a habit of losing your top when I call you fat or whatever, so I think it's easy then to also offer peer support in a very casual way using NLP, which is why I think, again, it zippers in well with existing department wellness initiatives. Again, in the looking down the road after you've learned it and are using it proactively.
Cool. So Jess, as we come to a close here, I'd love to explore, what does Jess need more of in her life to thrive even more than she is today?
Ooh. This is very vulnerable of me to say this, but I've been on a love diet for now, like about 3 years. Like I made an intentional choice to be single. And that too was a huge learning for me, like eliminating that teenage boy crazy, made a lot of bad decisions and woman that I was, and giving her a rest and really focusing on myself and this business and, getting to where I wanted to be emotionally. So I'm ready. I'm ready to find a fellow firefighter, first responder. Yeah. So there we go.
And our phone number will be on the screen right now.
But I'm ready for that. I think I
Yes.
finally, I think love, I made a lot of mistakes and it was just like serial monogamy of like, at some point I needed to exit the game. And man, I've thought about also talking about doing a love diet when instead of just jumping into another marriage or another relationship, or like, it's okay to be single for a while and really cleanse yourself of those habits. And then I think coming back, like, yeah, much stronger, smarter, capable, not having, an actual partnership, not a codependency. So, yeah.
Very wise. Very wise.
So, yeah,
So
that's
how can
it. So,
people
yeah,
learn?
call me.
There you go. I gotta say, the whole conversation, your wordplay is spot on.
Thank
Man,
you.
the amount of wordplay that you have, which I'm assuming comes from the NLP kind of practice, is pretty awesome. I love some of the words you've brought up tonight. So
Thank you. I lost the third grade spelling bee, so I'm still trying to recover from with big words and
yes, yeah,
vocabulary.
yeah,
So,
love it.
thanks for
So
having me on the show. I appreciate it.
it's been an honor. So tell our listeners how they can get in contact with you and maybe what your services are, and you have a podcast, and tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I would love to. So I also have a podcast on
Mhm.
firefighter wellness. And that you can find on our YouTube channel, which is at Firepower X. Firepower X is kind of our product for the fire community. We are just about to launch a new version of our website. So that's firepowerx.com. And then kind of our more organizational coaching side is ithinka.co, not .com, .co. And both of those websites, you can totally reach out to me, and all of our socials are linked there. And yeah, we post pretty regularly. We also have an active blog. I'm always writing articles. We had a couple articles come out on Crackle. So yeah, we're just warming up and getting the word out. So feel free to just come be an observer. And yeah, we'll also be hopefully starting some online networking that will be free to join here in the upcoming very, very soon towards the end of the year. So for anyone in the fire service, they can come for free. And then if you want to join our community, that will be about $10 to $12 a month when you need it, when you need that extra support and you want some coaching, you want some mentorship. You come use it. When you don't, you can peace out, just like with Netflix. When you want it, you use it. And so that we offer that kind of as a third party service so that your department isn't breathing down your neck and you can get all the tools you need to stay well and sharp as a firefighter. So, yep.
Are you a solopreneur or do you have a team?
I am a solopreneur. I have some consultants who are both active and retired firefighters in the area here. And occasionally we take on an intern or two when we have the capability. So, yeah, but
Awesome.
mostly I'm a one woman show. So,
Good job. Awesome.
thanks.
Well, it's been a pleasure chatting with you and learning a little bit more about NLP. I've heard it through my years and kind of dabbled in it a little bit, but I've never actually gone through the actual NLP program or actually a session with anyone.
Mhm.
But it's definitely very intriguing. So I'll definitely be diving into that a little bit more for sure.
Cool.
So
Yeah,
thank you
I'd
very
love
much
to.
for joining and sharing your
Awesome.
wisdom. Much
Yeah.
appreciated. Any last
Yeah.
words for the audience?
No, thank you for watching and taking your wellness seriously. And yeah, we
Love it.
appreciate you and understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Hope you enjoyed this great episode with Jess on NLP and how this might be part of your self-care toolkit. So until next time, stay well. That's a wrap.